course, it's Christianity 101, and as I say, we're just kind of dealing with the absolute basics. We're not here particularly interested in talking about the Anglican Church, although that's an important topic, and this is an Anglican church, and we're quite proud to be part of the Anglican Church of Canada and that worldwide communion. But what we're trying to do here is to get beyond things about specific churches and the differences between different churches and denominations, and why some do this, and why some baptize babies and some baptize adults, and why some use wine and some use grape juice at communion and all. We're trying to get past that and to talk about what is it, the common thing that's at the heart of it, that all these churches and denominations and so on are trying to express in different ways. So what's the core of Christian faith? That's what we're dealing with. Because religious faith is incredibly important. We live in a society that kind of, at least on the surface, sometimes laughs a little bit about faith commitments and religious convictions and people who are asking questions about God and who are coming to worship. As a matter of fact, that could be a real conversation stopper in some offices. They say, so what'd you do on the weekend? Oh, well, you know, I went out and played football with my son and took my daughter to her swimming. Oh, that's great. What'd you do? And I worked in the garden, and my wife and I went out for dinner on Saturday night. Say, oh, that's great. And then someone else says, you know, we had our friends in and we did this and that in the week. Oh, that's good. And what'd you do? Say, oh, well, of course, you know, our family all got up on Sunday morning and went to church. Ooh. Kind of moving back a little bit, not quite sure what to say. Maybe we'll just walk around that question the next time. So it's kind of a funny thing. But that aside, and whatever the reasons are for that, there's no question but that there are some really big issues around just about life. Some of the biggest questions of life. And our culture somehow, at least at the surface level, at the popular level, seems to conspire against providing a place where we can ask those questions and where we can have meaningful and informed and insightful conversations about them, and to be able to learn and to reflect on what it means to be a human being. But lots of us, I think, find ourselves asking some of these big questions from time to time, whether we're with a friend or whether we're by ourselves, or if we wake up in the middle of the night or we find that we're getting sick or something. These questions come to mind. Some of the questions like, why is there a world? Francis Schaeffer, one of the great Christian thinkers in the 1960s, said, he was a philosopher, a Christian philosopher, and he said, the basic question behind all of life, the most basic question you can ask, is why is there something rather than nothing? And where did it come from? And how did it get here? And who am I? What does it mean to be a human being? And where did I come from? And why am I here? What is life all about? Does this life that I live, has it got any meaning beyond itself? Or is it true that in the final analysis, we're all just the results of some big cosmic accident? And if we got questions of meaning, where are they going to take us? So where am I going? What's in the future? And what's my destiny? Besides just kind of getting older, is there life after death? We're finding in Mississauga more and more people are saying, is there any chance that life before death? They're just so busy. And so that's a real question, like, is there life before death? But an even bigger question, is there life after death? And how would we know? So those are some pretty basic questions. And we live in a culture, as I say, that at the surface, I don't think in the depths of people's hearts and minds, I think those questions are there. But superficially, on the edges of this culture, publicly, there's not much of a place to have those conversations. And people are just kind of push away from those things in a public way. But ultimately, it does make a huge difference to how we see ourselves and how we live and what's important to us. It makes a huge difference whether we come to the conclusion that we live on this planet as children of a loving parent, a cosmic parent, what Christians with the biblical tradition have called a heavenly father. If we live as children of a heavenly father who created us and who surrounds us with love, and who knows us individually, and who knows our name, and who has our destiny in his hand, on the one hand, or if we really are just the products of blind chance, of some cosmic accident, and we're on this piece of rock that's hurtling at an incredible speed through black space on its way to oblivion somewhere in a time frame that we can't begin to compute. That makes a big difference. Whether there's someone there who created us and knows us and cares about us, or if we're just on our way to eventual extinction and there's nothing out there in that black space that will ever notice or care. It makes a huge difference whether there is a God whose purposes and whose character and whose morality defines how we should live, or whether ultimately there really isn't any such thing as right or wrong except what various people at various times in history make up in order to help society function a little more smoothly. Whatever you do with those questions, and not just you, whatever anybody does with those questions, from my point of view, only an idiot would walk away from them and not try and answer them. Because in the end, these are the ultimate questions, like, what am I going to do with my one and only life? And how would I know what I should do with it? Because I want to get it right. If there is such a thing as getting it right. And if it does matter, I want to know. So I don't want the biggest questions to go by default while I'm trying to get a house with another 300 square feet of living space and a yard that's 8 feet farther across, wider. I don't want the big questions to go by default while I'm trying to get myself where I can drive a faster car. It's great if I can get a bigger house and a faster car, I suppose, but that really ultimately doesn't have much to do. Because the mortality rate in Mississauga, the mortality rate in Canada is still 100%. None of us are getting out alive. Listen, I'm not talking about this room right here. I mean, we can all go home. But, so I read somewhere said, life is a dangerous business. Nobody gets out of it alive. So only a fool would neglect the questions. And so we have a chance like this to think about that, and that's certainly what this church is about. So it'd be a question, can we know anything about whatever it is that people are talking about when they use the word God? We live in a funny culture where people think you can kind of make that up. That's interesting. Isn't that an interesting phenomenon? We think, well, I choose to think about it this way, as if that gives us the right. And having said that we've created that reality. I read something the other day and it said, so then we're all going to die, and we will all go and stand in front of whatever God it is that we imagine behind the thing. Oh, no, you won't. You can't imagine something, and then just because you imagine it, make that the reality. If there's anything to it, when we die, we'll go and stand in front of whatever God really is there. Not whatever we decide to imagine. So all I'm trying to say is that there's a framework in which to live life and to ask these questions. So is there anything that we could possibly know about that or have any certainty? And if we could, is there any chance that this God, whoever, whatever, might be a person? Have identity, self-consciousness, personality, act with intention. Is there any chance that God, rather than just being a blind power or force, could actually be a person? And if so, is there any chance that I or you could possibly be connected with that God in some way that we could get to know him or her or it? So those are some of the kinds of, I think, big questions of life. And as I say, there's not many places in the culture that give us a place to ask them or to talk about them in a reflective way. As a matter of fact, when we start to put that kind of, those are religious questions, but when we start to get into religious conversation, people get uncomfortable. There's all kinds of reasons for that. Did you ever watch The Simpsons? You know, The Simpsons, man. I love The Simpsons. I love The Simpsons. I think that The Simpsons is one of the greatest theological shows that has ever been broadcast on this continent. I mean, the thing is pure. It's pure theology, right? It's pure theology. So I was watching it the other night with my son Robbie, and I never know how old these things are because these reruns have been going on since day one. But Homer's in the hospital, right? He needs a heart bypass operation, so he's lying in the hospital, and Flanders is in the other bed. He's got something that he's praying to God. Oh, diddly inkly doodly, you know, like so. And Homer says, "Oh, Flanders, shut up!" So because Flanders is praying, he's doing stuff, and they pull the curtain. So now Homer's all by himself in his bed, right? And there's silence. And Homer's going in for the operation the next day. And Homer sits in bed and he says, "God, I'm really afraid to have this operation. I don't want to die. Please help me to live. But if I do die, take care of Marge and help Bart and Lisa and Maggie grow up to be good people." Isn't that a great prayer? The guy's just pouring his heart out, right? Just pouring his heart out. And then there's a big shadow over the bed, and here, shh. And they showed this nurse pointing to the sign on the wall. It says, "No praying." No praying. But it's absolutely brilliant, right? Because, I mean, Homer has no interest in going to church. Remember the time when he stayed away from church and God pulled the roof off the house? He says, "Homer Simpson, you've forsaken my church." Right? Homer says, "I'm not a bad guy. I work all week. I just don't know why, when I just get this one day off, that I have to go to a place that's so boring and tells me how bad I am." Yeah, and they show God standing there. He goes, "You've got a point, Simpson." They're both sitting there trying to figure it out. So all that kind of stuff's going on. And you know when it makes The Simpsons, it's important. Like, you know when it makes The Simpsons, it's important. And all they're doing is saying they're like 300 million Americans, when they get in that hospital bed facing surgery, no matter what they said at work, no matter what they said to their buddies in the pub, before they fell asleep the night before they had their heart opened up, they prayed and they said, "God, please help me with this." These are important questions. So where we want to start on this is, rather than kind of get theological and really spiritual, I just want to kind of start with the world that we live in, and not ask you kind of to stand up and give me answers and experiences, but just run through the thing. How do you feel about that world that you live in? And what I'm trying to get at here is I'm wondering if you share a feeling that I share a lot of times, and that a lot of people share with me, which is that there's some reasons for concern out there. That it's a gorgeous world. And when you're sort of wake up in the morning and the sun's shining and the birds are singing and you can kind of go down to the beach and, I don't know, see the dolphins dancing and the butterflies landing on the flowers and the bees buzzing around, it's absolutely beautiful. Like, this is a beautiful world. Or you see the stars at night. It's a gorgeous, beautiful world. But that's only half the story. The other half of the story is that there's something seriously wrong with this world. The fact that one of the news stories this week is about the Supreme Court having to kind of do a little dance and make a judgment on child pornography. I'm not talking about the judgment of the Supreme Court. I'm saying, what kind of a world is it where that has ever become an issue? And that really seasoned and intelligent people have to sit around and wrestle with that. That tells me that there's something wrong out there. And I'm just kind of, I'm kind of hoping that you share that experience with me, that somehow, through all the beauty and the mystery of the world, that something's broken. See, like every time I pick up the newspaper in the morning and glance through it with my coffee, or watch the news with my wife before I go to bed, there's a litany of things that tells me again, there's something wrong out there. It's broken. And the best minds seem to have a problem trying to fix it. And sometimes, when you get to the huge kind of apocalyptic scale, my wife and I went this weekend, or last weekend, we saw the movie 13 Days, back in 1962, when Khrushchev and Kennedy were having that standoff. And I remember I was 20 years old at the time. I was 19, about to turn 20. And watching all that and wondering what was going to happen. And after that, as the stuff comes out, it's made public, like, we had no sense. We knew that something happened. We had no sense that they were right at the edge of blowing the world apart. But again, in that movie, as they pick it up, like, we came really close to something. And so we've got a generation of people who've lived in the shadow of that. But every now and again, it looks like we've been able to make some breakthroughs and those tensions ease, and it kind of looks like, hey, maybe we're not going to blow this planet apart after all. We're all going to live happily ever after. And then you kind of look around and someone's saying, well, while we were worrying about that, we managed to poison the planet. And so the question is, are we going to blow it apart and try to just, or are we just kind of whimper into extinction because we poisoned the water and we're poisoning the air and things dying, right? All the environmental stuff. Well, I'm not turning into a tree hugger, but we got some pretty serious issues, right? And again, have I got you feeling good yet? Hey, I'm not kind of trying to depress you. All I'm doing, I'm trying to set something up in terms of the context for living. If we're going to be serious people and reflect on it, there is a problem. Something's wrong in the world. That's all. That's the point I'm trying to make, and I think that's irrefutable. I want to take it a second to a second step and say, there are days, and we talk about this in the church a lot, there are days when I back off and I'm not so worried about kind of the cosmic level because I'm not going to solve that anyway. But as I'm aware of it, some days when I stand and looking in the mirror, shaving in the morning, looking at me, whoever that stranger is looking back at me out of the mirror, I get the sense, not the sense, the overwhelming conviction, I know for a fact, that not only is there something wrong out there, but there's something wrong in here. And I can say that to you because I think we're fellow travelers. There's a sense that when you look inside, something's broken inside too. Just at the very simple level of what I know about myself and about everybody else I know at any level who is being honest, just really admits it, that I do not consistently live up to being the person that I want to be in terms of character development, in terms of what I invest in my marriage, in terms of how I treat my kids. I don't think I'm a particularly bad guy, but I don't think I continually live up to the person I want to be. And sometimes it seems like I can't do it, and sometimes it just seems like I don't want to do it. Both those things work. But when here's what I know. When I do something wrong, it isn't always out of ignorance. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's just because I don't give a damn. And that's just kind of human nature. Doesn't mean we're bad people. That's just part of what it means to be human. That's who we are. And so we find ourselves talking sharply when we don't want to, or conducting ourselves in such a way that later we feel a little bit ashamed of, or we bite our tongue. Oh, I wish I hadn't said that. So there's something wrong in the world. There's something wrong with me. What's going on? That's the context in which we think about Christian faith. Tony Campolo, a sociologist and a Christian minister, he teaches at a university in Philadelphia, and he's absolutely brilliant, and he's totally crazy. I mean, if you ever heard the man talk, he's one of the funniest people on two legs in the world, but he's also deeply, deeply serious. And so he tells the story. It's called, story is called, Who Changed the Price Tags? Who Changed the Price Tags? And Tony Campolo tells the story. He says, imagine that there's a huge department store in the middle of a big North American city. And you know how these department stores are. They're all kind of department stores, like Eaton's downtown. You got 5 floors. You got the bargain basement. Then up on the top floor, you have all the really expensive stuff. So down here, you got all this cheap plastic jewelry and, you know, the kind of cheap stuff. Up on the top floor, you got the diamonds and the real furs and the big ticket items. So he says, now imagine at midnight some night, some gremlins go into this department store, and just to commit mayhem, they start switching the price tags. So they cut all the price tags off the cheap stuff, like the $1.99 stuff downstairs. They get in the elevator, they go upstairs, they start putting this $1.99 stuff on the mink coats and the diamond bracelets and all this kind of stuff. And then they take these price tags, $10,000, $20,000, they come downstairs and they put it on all this junk. And they do this mayhem throughout all the store. Because now at 10 o'clock the next morning, the store opens and the employees come in, the public come in, and they start to see what's, and there's absolute mayhem. Because what's happened is that there's a huge price tag attached to the garbage, and the stuff that's of real value is practically being given away. And so Campolo says, so imagine trying to sort that out. Just imagine the scene. It's kind of funny if you play it. It'd be great to see it in a movie. Episode of The Simpsons, but yeah. Anyway, you kind of play around with that, but where Tony Campolo, the sociologist goes with it, he says this, that's exactly what's happened in our society. That we got so screwed up, kind of with the values of the culture trying to tell us what the good life is and what life is all about and how we should live in pursuing the great North American dream, that what's happened is that the price tags, the values have been all mixed up, the price tags have been switched, and people are paying a huge price for what ultimately turns out to be of no value at all. Like there's sacrifice in marriages and relationships with their kids and deep-seated joy and so in pursuit of, getting a few more bucks or, the bigger house or something, which seems to make sense. But he's just saying all that's happened is that the price tags have been switched, and so they're paying a huge price to get the stuff that ultimately, the old saying, like, no one yet on his deathbed looked at his wife and said, oh, honey, if I'd only spent more time at the office. It doesn't work. So it's stuff that ultimately proves not to have been so important. But in retrospect, look back and say, you know what? I threw away what was really the treasure while I was pursuing the cheap stuff. So Campolo, the sociologist, says that's the kind of culture that we live in. Who switched the price tags? That's what we're kind of talking about here as we look at these big issues and see what Christian faith has to say about it. My wife and I went 2 weeks ago downtown to the theater, and there we saw the musical Larry's Party. It was based on the novel by Carol Shields, written award-winning thing a few years ago, about this guy Larry going through his midlife crisis, right? And the party is on his 50th birthday. Larry designs mazes. He's a gardener. He designs mazes for rich people, in the backyards. For their honeymoon, they went to England and they went through the maze at Hampton Court. And he got lost in the maze. And after sort of everybody on the tour laughed at Larry because he was just a young guy in his early 20s, he got lost in the maze and they kind of laughed at him. And he confided with his wife when they got back to the hotel room, I got lost on purpose. I got lost just for fun. I just wanted to see what it was like. But then his marriage breaks up. And all kinds of things go wrong, and then he gets involved in another relationship, and then that breaks up, and then he gets involved in a third relationship, and it's not going, and all this stuff, and all these characters are coming together, and at the end of the play, it all comes together on his 50th birthday party, and all these people are together. And he meets up again with his first wife. And they're talking, kind of outside where the party's going on, and you can hear a pin drop in the theater, because this thing's all just coming down now, and everybody in the theater is saying, I think they're talking about me, And his wife says to his first wife, who he hasn't seen for years, says, Larry, do you remember when we were at Hampton Court on our honeymoon and you got lost in the maze and you said that you got lost on purpose? You said you wanted to be lost. And he said, yes. She said, do you still want to be lost? And it's just this quiet with 1,000 people in the theater while he says, more than anything else, I want to get found. More than anything else, I want to get found. And this super sophisticated culture that we have, from the perspective of Christian faith that we're going to be exploring, basically the culture is lost. Lost its moorings, lost its sense of center. So one of the Christian writers, Dallas Willard, says he read in the newspaper about a jet pilot who got disoriented because he was flying upside down. Doing some maneuvers. He somehow got disoriented, flying upside down. And when he went to go up, he went down and crashed his jet and killed himself. Because he couldn't tell up from down anymore. He was so disoriented. That's what's happening in Larry's party. That's what's happening in Tony Campolo's thing with switching the price tags. That's what's happening in the culture. When we come to the Bible, which is the source book of the Christian faith, the book in which we believe that God acting in history and speaking through people and making himself known in Jesus kind of tells us about the world and about ourselves, what comes out of that is that the world as it is and that we experience it isn't the world that God intended. The Bible itself says, yeah, there's something really serious wrong in the world. The world is not running. When we see this world and talk about these things, you get a hint of beauty and majesty and so on, but all these other things, the world is not running the way God intended it to run. That's a major theme of the Bible, and we're going to unpack that a little bit in this course. And what the Bible is saying is that, to describe this problem that goes on in the world and in human life is this, that in the beginning that God created this world, and in the beginning God created us, human beings, the Bible says created us in his image, created us in the image of God, so that we're spiritual people, and we're made to live in a relationship with God. We're made to be connected. So like, we're spiritual beings. We have these spiritual questions. We're on this spiritual quest. Just go to Chapters or any bookstore, and even while kind of stuff about organized religion's on the decline, there are all kinds of things about spirituality, helping people explore spirituality, because that's an undeniable part of who we are. It's at the essence of our lives. And so the scripture saying is that the Bible saying that God created us, these spiritual beings, to be connected with him, but that what has happened is that that relationship has suffered some serious damage. So that happens. We understand that language. We understand it from all kinds of relationships. It's like a man and a woman who get married and they're in love with each other, and then over a period of time things go wrong and hostilities come in and bitterness breaks in, and what started off with such great promise ends up absolutely shattered, and it's just all over the place. We know that kind of language. We get it between brothers and sisters. We get it between parents and children. There's alienation all over. We get alienation between what? Management and labor, between government and business, all these sorts of things. So we know the stuff about alienation. So what the Bible is saying is that the relationship that was intended between us and God, individually and collectively as the human race, has suffered serious damage. And because God created it to run in a certain way in which we're all connected with him and that we're working on his vision for the world and history and knowing him, that when that relationship sustains damage, the center breaks, or the center shifts or gets twisted. And when that happens, everything else is out of control, or out of whack, out of perspective. So there's serious things wrong in the world, and there's serious things wrong inside of us. And as Christians, as we come to the scriptures to try to make sense of this world, what it says is it's a spiritual problem that has to do with the fact that that relationship with God has suffered some pretty serious damage. And so in fact what the Bible says is that we find ourselves in a situation where our natural condition now is to be alienated from God rather than connected with God. Every time I hear somebody laugh about somebody going to worship or make fun of that, I think alienation. It's alienation. The alienation from God takes various forms. Sometimes it's indifference. That's people who just say, I couldn't care less. God exists, God doesn't exist. All I'm saying is, leave me alone and let me live my own life. And if God is there, I got a message for him. Good fences make good neighbors. So God, whatever it is that keeps you busy, you do that. Just leave me alone. So that's alienation. That's hard to have a relationship. That's not a good relationship, just one of indifference. Just leave me alone. You imagine that in marriage? Sort of, you're going up to your husband saying, do you love me, honey? Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Just stay on your side of the fence. Say, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. But so that's how that goes sometimes. Some people, the relationship has to do with hostility. People have got some stuff in their background. Maybe, they suffered some serious disappointment. A parent died when they were young, or they went through some suffering, and somehow they think, if there's a God there who really cared about me, that wouldn't happen. Or I remember as a little kid crying out to God, and this thing happened anyway, so if God does exist, I hate him. We meet lots of people in the church who come to talk stuff through who have had a lifetime of hostility against God. That's a relationship that's suffered serious damage. Sometimes it's just about confusion. Where would I start? Gosh, there are all these people all over the world who've got so many different understandings of who God is and what you're supposed to do, and this temple and that church and this sect and this cult and this book and that book. Where would you even start to get a grip on it? Sometimes it's just confusion. That's a relationship that's got a little bit of damage in it. I don't know who I'm married to. Is it you, or is it you? Am I living with you? Am I supposed to be with you? Well, lots of people like that in the world. Their wives are at home crying all night, but that's about a relationship that's suffered damage, right, when we don't know. So confusion is part of it. And then there's fear. There's fear. A whole lot of what happens around these spiritual questions is that people are just afraid. Afraid if I get too close to whoever this is, what might that be? Chances are I might lose control of my life if I get too close to whoever this God is. So let's just find a way to keep a little buffer. One of the great theologians actually said that after people have spent their whole life running away from God, they finally come and sit in the back row of church and try and hide there. Yeah. So I hope we're not talking about anybody like that here, but church is a great place for trying to hide from God rather than encounter God. Many people are absolutely scared stiff of God. They've heard all kinds of things about who this God is and what they would do if you were in church on Sunday. Remember I told you, when I was a little kid, I heard that this God was really mean to kids that wanted ice cream on Sunday. You got to start to work on that relationship. I don't think God's that interested in whether you have ice cream or not. So anyway, what the Bible's saying and what we're dealing with here is this sense that at the center, things are out of whack because we're created to be connected with God individually and as a race, and that's been broken down. And the story that's at the beginning of the Bible that tries to, in a way that we can understand, but it's obviously issues that are so far beyond the ability of the human mind to comprehend, they kind of tell it in a way that we can get a grip on. So there's this story, and what they say about those people in that story is that they kind of looked around and they said, if we can push God out of here, we'll own all of this and we can do whatever we want. If we can just get rid of God, life will be a whole lot better. And if we can just get rid of God, we'll know absolute freedom and we'll be our own God. And so that's the lie that came into the human race and into the human heart. And people have been living it out ever since. If I can just find a way to manage God or to move God from the center, then I'll be really free. I can be my own God. I'll do whatever I want to do, and I'll be a lot better off. And what the Bible's saying is because this was all created with God at the center and intended for that relationship, that the true freedom is found in being connected with God, and that when you move out, everything starts to fall apart. And so the world kind of drifts on, and we're not able to solve those problems. So the Bible talks about being separated, alienated from God, having this relationship broken. An important word that Christians use, and that's used in the church, and that's probably one of the most misunderstood words in the English vocabulary, is the simple word sin, S-I-N. Most people in our culture just think it stands for social insurance number, but it had a pedigree before that. And there's all kinds of things. I mean, if we went out on the steps, you know, at City Hall or over to Square One or Meadowvale Town Center with our crew here and said, we're talking today, we're trying to find out about words, and what comes to your mind when I say the word sin? That'd be interesting, like what people would kick up there, right? Wouldn't that be fascinating, just to see what people did? Most of it would be based on misunderstanding. It's one of the most understood words in the culture. The word sin, in its biblical context that we're going to be looking at, does not mean that people are bad. It's important to understand that. The word sin does not mean bad people. The word sin means being away. It's not about badness. It's about being away. It's about awayness, if you can use that word. It's about being separated and disconnected from the God who created us. And when we get in that situation where that relationship's broken, what that means is we get involved in a lifestyle that starts to look normal, but that isn't really what God had in mind, and things kind of get screwed up and broken. But it's important to remember that sin is about awayness, not primarily about badness. One of the most powerful stories that Jesus ever told was a simple story about a man who had two boys. And one of these boys was kind of dutiful and stayed at home and worked on the farm. And as Jesus tells the story, and some of you are familiar with the story, but as Jesus tells the story, the youngest one, he was kind of impatient. And basically what he went and he said to his dad, "Dad, you are a healthy old horse, and you aren't ever going to die. Or you're not going to die fast enough for me. I can't wait for you to die so that I can get on with my life. So how about if you just give me whatever I'm going to inherit when you die? How about if you give it to me now, and I'll just be on my way?" You mentioned the first people hearing the story, they would just gasp. Like, what? I mean, especially in the culture in which Jesus told the story. What? Anyway, Jesus says, the Father gave the Son the money, and the Son took off. He went off and he did whatever he did. Jesus put it, he went into a far country where he wasted all the money. And when he ran out of the money, interestingly enough, he ran out of friends. He found himself sitting in the bar all by himself one night because he couldn't buy the drinks anymore. He went out. Now you understand that we're talking here in a Jewish context, or in the culture there, the Jewish people would never eat ham. You know, like pigs were considered unclean and so on. So to really get the point through how far this kid had sunk, Jesus says he went to work for a pig farmer. Like this, you know, everybody would just gasp as he told that story. A pig farmer, no. So he was so far down that he was about to start eating the food that he was feeding the pigs, because he was so hungry, when Jesus says he came to his senses. And he said, "This isn't right. My father's got a big farm. How do I get to this mess? I'm going to go home." And then he thought, no, my father won't let me go home. I blew it. So he said, but you know what? He's telling himself, you know what? I bet you my father, I know the farm, he might hire me. He's got servants. I've blown it as a son. I can't be a son anymore. I've really blown that. But maybe if I go home and ask my dad if he'll give me a job and I can live outside, you know, in the shed with the servants, be a hired hand. That'd be better than this. I'll swallow my pride. So he gets up and he starts to make his way home. Doesn't have a car, he's got to walk. And as Jesus says, as he's walking home, going along that dusty road, you can imagine you've all kind of been kids in these kind of situations. What's he doing? He's rehearsing his speech. Like he's rehearsing his speech. I'll say, Dad, I know this, that, no, not Dad. I mean, he's practicing, Dad, I'm going to do Dad, Dad. He's rehearsing it. He's trying to get it right. You cut to the other side. See, this kid has never been a parent. He's never been a parent. Because he's never been a parent, he doesn't have a clue what's been happening on that farm. Well, he was out having a good time, figuring he found his freedom, figuring that he was really found out what life was all about. He had no idea, right, that every night his mom and dad lay in bed and wondered where he was and hoped he was safe and said a little prayer that maybe he'd be all right. And he had no idea that every day when his father worked in the fields, that his father would look up and look down the road to see if maybe this was the day the boy was coming home. We know that because Jesus said, as the boy walked along, he says, his father was in the field and the boy's practicing the speech. Jesus says, while he was still miles down the road, the father saw him. He was looking for him. And while he was still rehearsing the speech, the father just flew, ran down the road. The son saw him coming, and he starts making the speech. Dad, I've blown it, da-da-da. He's trying to get it right. And the father just throws his arms around him and hugs him and starts to cry. And the kid never gets a chance to make the speech. Because the father's saying to the servants, get a party going. Send the word out. My boy's home. This is to sell. He's not even, and this guy's going to say, give me a job with it. Get his room ready. He's home. He's home. Right? Jesus tells the story to give us a sense of how God sees us. That God is not sitting wherever God sits saying, look at those miserable slobs. How dare they try to cut me out of their lives? They are going to get it, and I just looking forward to giving them all a good smack. Right? That's not that. Jesus is saying, get all those images out of your mind. There's only one thing that's important here. Look at this mess. And look at the questions and the bloody price tag switched inside up and upside down, and flying inside out and lost in the maze and wanting to be found. All God's saying is, come on. Just come on. I'm here. I'm inviting you. Come on. Let's get connected again. Let's get connected again. And when you do, we'll have a party. So that's what Christian faith is about. Understanding what that connection is about and how it happens. And next week we're going to talk about where Jesus fits into that.